If you're a guest here today, we're glad you're here. Hopefully you've had a chance to shake hands with somebody, or hopefully you'll stick around for a few minutes afterwards so we can say hi to you and connect with you. My name is Beau Davis. For those of you who may not know me, I'm executive minister here, and I do a little bit of preaching from time to time, which I'm starting to figure out a little bit how to do, I think. I'm trying to get better at it. Last week I was at a conference, used to be called National Conference on Youth Ministries. Now it's called National Children's and Youth Ministries Conference, because it's trying to be a little more inclusive of the children's ministers, because they don't always have a place to go to be together. And while I was there, I met with a bunch of different preachers. And then it dawned on me, this is a youth and children's ministry conference. Why are there preachers here? And so I started to ask them, and they began to tell me it's one of the best conferences to go to. And really uplifting and encouraging. And I had an opportunity to hear a lot of good speakers who, find out this time of year, like in January, that they'll be speaking in January of next year. So they have that one lesson that they work on for a year, off and on, all year long. And so it's the best of the best in a lecture. It's really awesome. I mean, it would be really awesome if even here, if we had a different person preach every Sunday, but they've been working on that one lesson all year long. Imagine how awesome that would be. But while I was there, I just had an opportunity to be blessed, to hear from some really good speakers, to be encouraged about the church and where the church is going, to meet people from all over this nation, come in to bless teenagers and children. And really, as one guy said, he keeps in his office, he keeps a baton, like a relay baton. And he says, every time I walk in my office, I see this relay baton, and I'm reminded that Christianity was before me, and it will live past me as long as I pass the baton that was handed to me, right? Oh, that's pretty good. I need to get a baton. I need to go in my office. I have some stuff that tries to remind me. Well, as I was sitting there in one of these lessons, I got to the point where I kind of asked God, what have you been trying to say to me this last year? Where have I heard you speak? And as I sat there and reflected, I was reminded, this year have kind of rediscovered sitting and doing a puzzle. And if you haven't ever done that, I would encourage you to do that. It's a little better than flipping through your phone. And I discovered it last December, so it's been just a little over a year, 2022, when I was at my mom's house for Christmas. And my youngest brother, who passed away last January, was there with us, and he didn't have a lot of ability to move and do things and get around. And me and a sister-in-law and the nieces and the nephews, my mom's grandkids, his kids, we would just kind of have laid this puzzle out on this table, and we would just work on it and chat a little bit, and then go do other things and come back and work on it and chat a little bit. And I thought, this is kind of calming at some level. And so we talked a little bit about puzzles, and we kind of, and then I kind of forgot about it. And then this last fall, or was it my birthday? I can't remember, but I got a puzzle. Somebody gave me a puzzle, and I sat down in our living room, and I started to work on this puzzle, and I was reminded, I was reminded of a time I'd been over at Scott and Lecky King's house, and I'd walked in, and in the middle of their living room, they have a big coffee table, and on this coffee table was this puzzle that looked like it was 1,000,000 pieces, little tiny pieces. And as I could begin to look, I could tell it was kind of a scene out of Harry Potter. And I later discovered he'd been working on it for about a year, just laid out these little tiny pieces, and it was something he would sit down in the living room, and people would walk up, and you'd kind of put a piece in here or there every so often, right? And so I kind of got back into puzzles a little bit, and found out another guy in our church gets a puzzle gift every year. It's a wooden puzzle. It's beautiful, and he let me borrow some of his puzzles, and I'd sit down on a Saturday. And as the kids would come up and chat with me, or Jill might come up and talk, they don't want to do the puzzle with me by any means of the word. we just chat and talk, work on it for a little bit and come here and hang out. Well, I got this really cool idea. I don't know if Google listens, but I think it does. I started getting ads for this puzzle called the $2 million puzzle. Anybody heard of this puzzle? See, I didn't think so, but you've been in this room now, and somehow it knows, and you'll see it in your ad. And so I thought, I looked at it, and this is cool. You do a puzzle, and when you're done with the puzzle, it's a QR code. And so you scan the QR code with your phone, and you put in a little code that comes in the box, and you win money. Anywhere from $1 to $1 million. So I bought a 4-pack of these, and I gave one to Scott King because I knew he liked puzzles. I gave one to Kevin Staples because I knew he liked puzzles. And my Muslim friend who lives down the street, he showed up in my house one day and gave me a Christmas gift, and I was like, this is the other puzzle. This is what it was for, because I didn't have a person. And I said, hold on, Jay. And I went and grabbed this puzzle, and I said, this is for you. And he goes, what is it? And I said, $1 million. Possibly. And he looked at me very confused. A couple weeks later, I texted both of these guys. This is at the beginning of December, and I texted both of all these guys out. And one of them responded back and said, Beau, if you ever think of giving me a puzzle again, don't. Another one, I picked up Jake to go to Florida at this conference, and we had to leave at 3:45 in the morning to catch the flight. And I asked him when he came out, I said, well, everybody's still asleep in your house? He goes, no, Dad's in the living room working on that puzzle. It's a chance at $1 million. It's a chance at a life-changing opportunity. If you finish it, you could win big money. But you got to do it before the 10th of this month. There's a deadline. And I've got one, and I'm a little anxious about it because it's a hard puzzle. When I first dumped out those pieces, I just looked at the chaos like you see on that screen, and they all look the same. There isn't a spot on there like you get with a normal puzzle where you've got like, oh, this is kind of like maybe a mountain area, and this is like a sign, or this is like you can start to kind of no. The whole puzzle's the identical. It's a QR code. Think about it, right? It's almost impossible to do, which I thought, this is a great gimmick, right? But you're compelled to do it because the reward is so great, potentially. So I do, like every other puzzle person out there does, I begin to employ my tactics. At first, I look at it and go, I should just not do this. And then I decide, you know what, I'm gonna try to look at the images. I'm gonna try to look at each puzzle piece and see if there's any pattern in the image. And you begin to sort. And then I think, no, I'm just gonna look at the shapes of the pieces and begin to line up all the shapes, because then you can kind of see based on the shapes where things might connect. And then I thought, oh, no, you should start with the edges, because right? Right? But I had learned at a previous puzzle that edge pieces aren't always edge pieces. Sometimes they funnel down to an angle real tight. You can't quite tell. And so I implemented that tactic. And then I decided, you know what? I'm just going to sit here with one piece, and I'm going to stare at that one piece, and I'm just going to go. Sometimes it'd be 30 minutes or an hour sitting there, and I hadn't added a piece. Brain gets distracted. It's hard to stay focused when you're staring at, this is just a 500 piece. I can't imagine a 3,000 or higher piece, right? And just to add more fuel to the fun, this particular puzzle doesn't come with an image you can look at, because if it did, you just scan the image, right? So they can't send you a picture. So you have no clue what the end result is. And you get to thinking about puzzles. A lot of puzzles in life like this come with an end picture. They come with an image of what it's supposed to look like. And as you're looking for the pieces, you can look to the image. You can see what it's supposed to be. And then you can go back and go, I think that piece looks like it goes, and move forward. But the hard puzzles in life don't have a concluding image. The only reference point you have for the really hard ones is the ones from the past, the knowledge about how a puzzle might work. And it really doesn't matter. I have discovered that no matter what tactics you employ, there's that one piece that just doesn't exist. Until you get to the end and you go, it's been there right in front of me all this time. You been there? I hope you don't get lost in puzzles like I have. You know, in many ways, as I reflected on that, just sitting there talking to God, what have you been trying to teach me in 2023? He said to me, 2023 was a puzzle. Had a lot of loss in 2023. I did more funerals last year, than I've ever done in my entire life. Felt aimless many times, shifting my focus from one piece of a puzzle because it's too complex to another. As I look out into the world at what the world is doling out, trying to understand how do we fit and connect? How does this church, this concept of this bride of Christ, do its called duty into a world that is ever changing and what seems to be pieces that never fit together? It was a tough year. I can't even imagine what tough might look like in 2024, 2025, 2026, as I think about this daunting chaos that is before us all the time and our call to bring order to that chaos. The same way God in Genesis chapter 1 took this formless void and brought order, that he carefully knit the pieces together to make a beautiful picture that he said, and it was good. Culture. The culture around us that we are called to engage with its ever-shifting winds and waves, every breath, every new year bringing some new way of trying to connect the image into perfection, to try to right the wrongs of human past in order to bless human future, entity of humanity looking towards the future of humanity, whether that is to space, whether that is to conservation, whether that is to governmental systems, constantly seeking out a way to bring back order from the chaos that it once was, a puzzle once put together, separated, now trying to be formed again by man. We Christians look out at that complex world with its odd-shaped pieces. And like people, like Jabari said in the songs, this heart, like a heart to want to bless and help. And a heart sometimes distracted by the wrong pieces, trying to make the connections in some of the wrong ways. In some ways, being a church can feel like a puzzle. If you're an elder or a leader or a deacon or trying to figure out even your own place, where do I connect? Where do I fit in? How do I become part of this tapestry that God is forming here to do good in this world? It can feel complex. And so we employ our own tactics, much like a puzzle master might. Our tactics, we look to other churches. What are they doing? How are they doing? We may look to biblical interpretations. What does the Bible really say about how to be a church in 2023? We look to history and tradition, and we may go, let's go back like to the old puzzles that were put together and try to re-implement them. We ask those hard questions about how should we respond? Like we did in 2023 in the early part of the year when we talked about being aliens and foreigners in this land. Do we assimilate? Do we just become part of culture and try to be light in the darkness individually by ourselves, not really looking all that different? Do we isolate? Do we form a group together and go live off on an island that called Christianity or Texas, I don't know, and try to become our own entity away from everything? Do we differentiate? Do we figure out and stare at that puzzle and try to figure out how to be in the world but not of the world? We know we are exiles here. And so we also look to knowledge to help us, right? Orthodoxy, what do we believe? Orthopraxy, what do we do? Eschatology, soteriology, ecclesiology, bibliology, pneumatology, right? Our biggest ones in culture, psychology and sociology currently. That piece, I think, fits over here. All good things, but ultimately, as we stare at our puzzle, it's incomplete. This puzzle that I've been working on off and on for the past few weeks, hoping I win $1 million. Don't worry, if I do, I won't quit. Or maybe you want me to, I don't know, I'm just kidding. It has another complex factor. Some of the pieces fit together that shouldn't. It's the most annoying puzzle I've ever done. If you don't believe me, ask Scott or Kevin. Kevin finished his, he got $1 out of it. He's not here right now, but if he is in second, I'm going to tell him, love you, dude. And you don't owe me that 50 cents. When I was at the conference last week, listening to different preachers, one of the ones that I was listening to in a morning devotional is a guy named Chris Seidman. He lives just down the road. Goes as a preacher at the church called The Branch. And he said this: as Christians, we can often wind up under the influence of complexity, of situations, rather than the influence of Jesus. And I think that is true of me. And I think that is true of a lot of us in the West. Because of our vast knowledge and understanding and our fixation on education and information, we can become aware. As one guy said, the older you get, the more you realize that the more you know, the more you don't know. And we can get lost in the complexity of things to the point where we stand up from the puzzle and we just walk away, which isn't bad from time to time to clear your mind, to refocus your brain. In fact, I've employed that tactic too. Walk away, come back and go, oh, there's that piece. And I think I just need to walk away for an hour and come back. Walk away for an hour, come. It'll be done next in 2025. We can become so fixated on the one broken piece in our culture that we can lose sight of our real true purpose. Jesus dealt with this. Had people coming at him all the time in his life with their complex situations, with their complex knowledge and information. The Jewish leaders and scribes trying to constantly get Jesus stuck in complex answers and questions, trying to totally remove his focus on his singular purpose that he was here for. And I think of one such passage out of Matthew chapter 11, starting in verse 2. And I would love to spend all of the remaining time I have, all 3 minutes and 50 seconds on this passage. But I want to point out a couple of things in it. It says this: when John heard in prison, first of all, John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, who came before him, who's been preaching in the wilderness, an odd character nonetheless, in prison while Jesus' ministry is going on. Jesus isn't in prison with John. He isn't taking John out of prison. He never will. As the story goes, John will be beheaded in prison. Jesus does not solve that problem. He does not go to find that piece of the puzzle and connect it. He stays focused on his task. But so when John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" John doesn't even know if Jesus is Jesus at this point. He knew in the womb that Jesus was Jesus, but he doesn't know now. He's wondering. Maybe he's wrong. And Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see, that the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them." Verse 6. "And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." What is offensive about helping all these people? Something. And as they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? If you think about John, out in the wilderness, dressed in skins, eating locusts and honey, probably an insane-looking person out in the woods, and people would go out to him to hear a message. Jesus is looking at him. Did you think you would find a reed shaken by the wind? What did you go out to see? Someone dressed in kingly robes? It says soft robes up there. Look to those who wear soft robes in the royal palaces. What did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one whom it is written, "See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way before me." Jesus doesn't bail John out. He doesn't save him from his pain. He seems to do absolutely nothing for him except answer his question by saying nothing to the answer of the question. Talking about the way he blessed anyone and adding in this line, "Blessed is anyone who takes no offense." Jesus had to be offensive to a lot of people. This Jesus that we read about in text, this love come down, is not love to everyone. Sometimes we can get so caught up in solving that puzzle, placing that one piece, that we lose sight of the direction God is trying to take us. So what is that direction? Well, Jesus says in John chapter 13, verse 34 and 35, as he is training these people, as he is telling these people who are following him and they're looking at him, "This is what I need from you." Verse 34, "A new commandment I give you, love one another, as I have loved you, so that you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Do we love each other? Do we get caught up in the wrong puzzle that we're supposed to solve? When we step back and we try to look at the picture that we're trying to match our puzzle to, is it Christ? Or are we caught up following something else? Do we get caught up in taking this pile of puzzle pieces and trying to make it connect into an image that the world says it should be? Wealth, power, safety, security, knowledge, wisdom, information. Are we looking at the image and trying to connect all these pieces and getting some connections? Because, they do fit together. But the more we build, the more we go, something's not connecting quite right. There must be a piece misplacing. And then I heard God say, "Beau, it's not about completing the puzzle." Speaker you just heard talked about passing the baton. God's the one that put the puzzle together in the beginning. God's the one that's going to put the puzzle back together in the end. What is my role now? It may be to place a few pieces, but it's to pass on the ability to connect those pieces to the next gen. It's to disciple. To say, follow me as I follow God. And what does God want of his disciples? To love one another. And as we look to one of the premier disciples that wrote most of the second half of the New Testament, this guy named Paul, we read his words, the later part of his life out of 1 Corinthians 13, 8 through 13. And it says this: love never fails. Where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass. For we know in part, we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part, like a puzzle, well, it disappears. Because you think about when you put a whole puzzle together and you stand back from it, do you see the lines anymore? It's one image that's been hidden. And we can see little pieces, but we can't stand back far enough to see the full image. Paul says, when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, verse 11, I put away the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only in part, a reflection in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. As we look out in 2024, church, at this complexity, at these reeds that get blown by every wind and wave, we're called to stand firm. In our next series, we're going to be looking at the Christians who 60, 70, 80 years after Jesus is gone, being written to in 2 Peter and Jude, because the winds and the waves are blowing. God hasn't returned. Jesus hasn't come back yet like many of them thought they would in that first generation. Remember, time to God, a minute is like 1,000 years. Jesus is coming back, amen? He will be here. Until then, we know in part, we see in part. And we have to guard and stand firm against the winds and the waves. We cannot get sucked into our orthopraxy, how we do church, if the reason we do it isn't because of us loving one another. We must keep our focus on Christ, the only human who's ever done it, who's ever figured out how to love his Father in heaven and love everyone he comes in contact with, even when those people see it in a way he doesn't mean to. Blessed are the ones who will not take offense in me, he says. We must stand firm in God's love and in his ways. For 2024, let us commit our hearts to looking to Christ as we build the puzzles of our lives, with the goal of letting our identity that is seen by this world is that we love one another. Let that be our light, not the way we do church, not the way we live in houses and drive cars, but that our voice of love here amongst us would be so bright, so salty, that it could be our identity. God's love never fails. Singing Oaks, let's stand firm in that love. Let's model that love. Let's put together that puzzle.